The clock struck 8 p.m. in Ouagadougou. Across the nation, families turned on their televisions for the nightly news, but what they saw this time was not routine. The anchor's tone was somber. "Breaking news," she said. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is with us tonight to confirm reports from the United States Embassy. Moments later, the minister appeared calm, composed, but with eyes that carried the weight of history. In his hands, a single document, a note verbale from the U.S. Embassy. And with that, he spoke the words that sent a chill across Burkina Faso. The United States has suspended the issuance of tourist and student visas for all Burkinabe citizens. It sounded like a bureaucratic update until the truth unfolded. This was not about paperwork. This was about dignity. Behind the polite language of diplomacy lay a darker story. Washington had asked Burkina Faso to accept deported migrants from the United States, not just its own citizens, but anyone the U.S. deemed undesirable. And the answer from Ouagadougou, a simple, unwavering no. The minister's voice did not tremble when he said it. Burkina Faso is a destination, not a land of deportation. It was more than a statement. It was a line drawn in the sand. For decades, Africa had been told where to stand, who to host, what to obey. But tonight, a small nation dared to speak with the full weight of its soul. So the question stands, is this really about visas or about punishing those who choose pride over obedience? And what does this mean for every African nation watching, wondering who's next? Stay with us, because what unfolded in this quiet West African capital may redefine the meaning of sovereignty itself. If you believe dignity should never come with a visa price, share this story. Subscribe if you stand with nations that refuse to kneel. It began like a whisper on social media, a rumor that Burkinabe citizens would no longer be able to apply for American visas in their own country. Many dismissed it as fake news, another online storm that would pass by morning. But by nightfall, the confirmation arrived not from Washington, but from the desk of Burkina Faso's own foreign minister, seated before the cameras of national television. In his hands was the evidence, a note verbale from the U.S. Embassy in Ouagadougou, stamped and signed, confirming that the United States was suspending the issuance of tourist and student visas for citizens of Burkina Faso. From that day forward, Burkinabe applicants would have to travel hundreds of miles south to Lomé, Togo, just to be interviewed. The official explanation sounded neutral, almost technical. Washington claimed that certain Burkinabe nationals had failed to respect the conditions of their visas. It was, according to the embassy, a procedural matter, an administrative measure, nothing personal. But as the minister spoke, a different picture emerged. With every sentence, it became clear that this was not about rules or compliance. It was about pressure. A quiet form of punishment dressed in diplomatic language. He revealed that this decision followed a proposal the U.S. had made to Burkina Faso months earlier, during the administration of Donald Trump, a proposal to accept deported migrants from the United States. These were not Burkinabe citizens, but individuals from across Africa and Latin America whom Washington wanted to send back somewhere. The Americans had offered a deal. If Burkina Faso agreed to serve as a destination for deportees, they would receive assistance and closer cooperation. But the government of Captain Ibrahim Traoré refused flatly, without hesitation. It was indecent, the minister said. It violated everything we stand for: the dignity, the sovereignty, the vision of our people. That refusal, he explained, was rooted in Traoré's philosophy of revolution, that Burkina Faso is not a dumping ground for the unwanted, but a homeland of choice for those who come freely by conviction and respect. Still, the Americans persisted. After the introduction of Traoré's free visa for all Africans policy, U.S. diplomats returned with a new suggestion. Since your country now welcomes all Africans without a visa, could you also receive non-Burkinabe deportees that we remove from the United States? Once again, Ouagadougou said no, this time even more firmly. We will never be a land of deportation, the minister declared. Every African is welcome here, but only if they come by choice, not by force. Then came the turning point. Just days after that final rejection, the embassy's note verbale arrived, announcing the suspension of U.S. visas. Was it coincidence or retaliation? The timing spoke louder than the words on paper. For many in Burkina Faso, this was more than a visa matter. It was a test of sovereignty. Could a small African nation say no to one of the world's most powerful countries and still hold its head high? As the interview continued, the minister's tone mixed disappointment with resolve. He made it clear that Burkina Faso would not yield to humiliation. We remain a destination of dignity, he said. a land open to all Africans who come in freedom, but never a land chosen for others to dispose of their burdens. His message was unmistakable. This was a matter of principle, not policy. Burkina Faso would rather endure isolation than surrender its moral compass. And for those watching that night from dusty villages to city cafes, it wasn't just about travel restrictions. It was about something far deeper, the right of a nation to decide who it is. As the interview went on, the atmosphere in the studio thickened. Every word from the minister seemed to echo beyond the walls of that newsroom into embassies, diplomatic circles, and households across Africa. What began as a visa announcement was turning into something much larger, a declaration of principle, a moral confrontation between a small nation and a superpower. The turning point came when the minister stopped reading from his prepared notes and spoke from the heart. His voice grew steady, eyes fixed on the camera. We received this decision right after we reaffirmed our refusal to accept deported individuals from the United States, he said. Is this a coincidence, or is it pressure? Is it diplomacy? Or is it blackmail? The question hung in the air. Even the anchor beside him fell silent, as if realizing that history was being written in that moment. He continued describing the people America wanted to deport, not criminals, not threats, but ordinary men and women who had lived in the U.S. for years. These people worked in your homes, cleaned your streets, cared for your elderly, he said, his voice breaking slightly. They built your comfort with their hands. And now you call them undesirable. It was a raw human appeal, a reminder that migration was not just about policy, but about people. Many watching across West Africa felt tears well up. This was not the usual diplomatic tone. It was something deeper, the cry of a continent, tired of being told what to accept and who to be. As his words spread online, the reaction was instant. Across social media, Burkinabe citizens began sharing his quote, "Le Burkina Faso est une terre de dignité, pas une terre de déportation." Within hours, it became a rallying cry. Hashtags like Entre Terre de Dignité and Stand with Burkina trended across Francophone Africa. Students recorded videos repeating his words. Shop owners in Ouagadougou placed posters on their walls saying, "Not a land of deportation." And in Mali, Niger, Senegal, and even Congo, commentators praised Burkina Faso for taking a stand many had long avoided. But the emotional climax of the interview came when the minister connected the story to something bigger, the legacy of Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself. "This is not about a visa," he said. "It's about our revolution, about dignity, sovereignty, and respect. We cannot be free if our worth is decided elsewhere." He spoke of Traoré's vision, a homeland where Africans could walk with pride, a place of welcome for those who came by love, not coercion. In that instant, his message transcended politics. It became spiritual, a defense of human dignity itself. Then, in an unexpected turn, he addressed America directly. "We will continue to respect the American people. We know that between nations there can be misunderstanding. But respect must be mutual. Friendship cannot be built on humiliation." The room fell silent again. He had not shouted. He had not accused. Yet every sentence carried the force of defiance, quiet, composed, unbreakable. Outside the studio, the streets of Ouagadougou were calm, but something had shifted. Taxi drivers, students, and market vendors spoke with a new kind of pride. "They wanted to shame us," one said, but our minister turned it into honor. Internationally, the interview sparked ripples. African newspapers praised the stand as a new page in post-colonial diplomacy. Analysts in Europe admitted that the message was powerful, a polite rejection of global inequality. Even some American commentators caught off guard wondered aloud, are we witnessing the moment when Africa starts defining its own moral ground? By the end of the night, one thing was clear. This was no longer about who could travel where. It was about who still had the courage to look power in the eye and say, "Enough." By the next morning, the shock had turned into reflection. In Ouagadougou's cafes and university halls, people no longer spoke of the visa ban as a humiliation, but as a moment of awakening. The story had changed shape. What was meant to isolate Burkina Faso had instead united it. Students at the University of Ouaga marched peacefully through the campus gates, holding cardboard signs that read, "Better no visa than no dignity." Across the country, community radios repeated the minister's words, and callers from remote villages phoned in to say they felt proud to be Burkinabe. For decades, Africa had been conditioned to react with fear when a major power took punitive action, fear of sanctions, of aid cuts, of losing diplomatic favor. But this time the reaction was different. This time the people stood firm behind their government. In the days following the announcement, Burkina Faso's parliament held a special session. Lawmakers from across the political spectrum praised the ministry's stance as a defense of national honor. Opposition figures, often critical of Traoré's policies, publicly agreed that the dignity of our citizens cannot be traded for convenience. Diplomatically, the government's response was measured yet resolute. The minister reminded the public that in diplomacy, there is a principle called reciprocity. We will take the necessary measures within the same limits of respect. He sent a subtle but unmistakable message that Burkina Faso was ready to answer in kind if pushed further. Still, the government avoided escalation. We make no war with friends, the minister clarified. But friendship must not mean submission. Behind the scenes, analysts began to see the broader significance. Burkina Faso's decision was part of a new pattern, a quiet realignment within the alliance of Sahel states AES. Alongside Mali and Niger, the country had already distanced itself from Western military dependency. Now it was redefining its diplomatic identity, one that valued self-respect over privilege. Local media framed the episode as the first major test of Burkina's moral sovereignty. International outlets took notice too. Le Monde described it as an act of symbolic independence. Al Jazeera called it a lesson in dignity. Even The Guardian ran a headline asking, can a small African nation teach the world what sovereignty really means? Meanwhile, among the youth, a quiet pride grew. They began to see their passports not as limits, but as symbols of a country unafraid to make hard choices. In markets and schools, posters appeared with the words, Terre de dignité, land of dignity. For some, the consequences were practical. Visa applications canceled, travel plans delayed. But even those affected expressed understanding. One student whose scholarship to the U.S. was suspended told reporters, "If that is the price for our dignity, I will wait." The government announced new scholarship opportunities in Russia, Turkey, and the African Union's new education initiative, further proof that Burkina Faso was no longer bound by Western dependency. In the end, what the U.S. might have intended as a warning turned into a rallying point. The ban had failed to divide. It had built a stronger sense of national coherence. Because in the eyes of ordinary Burkinabe, this was not a diplomatic slight, it was a badge of respect. Their country had chosen to stand tall even if it had to stand alone. And in that choice, the revolution of dignity, the one Captain Ibrahim Traoré had envisioned, moved quietly from words into the hearts of the people. In Washington, the reaction was cautious, almost uncomfortable. The State Department avoided direct comment, referring journalists back to the note verbale and its technical explanation about visa misuse. But beneath the surface, insiders admitted that Burkina Faso's defiance had caught them off guard. For decades, the United States had shaped migration policy in Africa with little resistance. Countries quietly accepted agreements that turned them into holding grounds for deported migrants in exchange for aid or security cooperation. But now one of the smallest and poorest nations on earth had said no publicly, firmly, and unapologetically. Some American analysts on independent platforms began to ask uncomfortable questions. Are we punishing dignity, or are we witnessing the limits of American soft power in Africa? Think tank experts at the Brookings Institution and foreign policy circles admitted privately that Washington's influence in the Sahel was shrinking faster than anticipated. After the expulsion of French forces and the rise of the AES alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the region had become a new symbol of resistance against external pressure. Western media narratives diverged sharply. CNN and Reuters described the situation as a routine administrative matter blown out of proportion, while African and Middle Eastern outlets saw it differently. Al Jazeera called it a turning point in Africa's diplomatic awakening. RT Africa described it as the day a nation of 22 million reminded the world that respect must be mutual. Meanwhile, across Europe, quiet unease began to spread. French commentators worried that the incident might encourage other African countries to reject Western conditions tied to migration and aid. Germany, which had similar deportation programs, reportedly re-evaluated its upcoming agreements with Niger and Senegal. Even within the U.S., not everyone agreed with Washington's stance. Civil rights groups and African diaspora organizations criticized the decision, calling it a political punishment disguised as procedure. A viral op-ed in The Atlantic asked, "Why does America demand loyalty but deny respect?" In diplomatic corridors, the episode stirred debate about a new Africa-West dynamic, one in which smaller nations were beginning to challenge not just economic dominance, but moral authority. And yet amid all the headlines, Captain Ibrahim Traoré remained silent. No speech, no statement. Only a single phrase appeared later on the official government page: Burkina Faso remains a land of freedom and dignity. That silence spoke louder than any press release. It became a mirror forcing the world to look inward. Was the United States long a champion of democracy and human rights, willing to apply those same principles when the voices came from Africa? For many observers, the answer was already clear. The Burkina Faso episode had become a test case, one that revealed the fragile balance between global power and moral integrity. And as analysts from Nairobi to New York began to debate Traoré's diplomacy of dignity, one thing was undeniable. The world was beginning to see that Africa no longer needed to shout to be heard. Sometimes it only takes a quiet no spoken with conviction to shake the foundations of an empire. Night fell again over Ouagadougou. The city lights shimmered across the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where the flag of Burkina Faso waved gently under the desert wind, red, green, and gold, the colors of defiance and pride. The crisis that began as a bureaucratic visa issue had evolved into something far greater, a moral stand that echoed beyond borders. Burkina Faso had refused to bend, and in doing so it had reminded the world of something many had forgotten: the strength of a nation does not lie in its wealth, but in its worth. In the following days, African leaders quietly reached out to express solidarity. From Bamako to Dar es Salaam, ministers and diplomats whispered admiration for what they called la diplomatie de la dignité. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens across Africa felt inspired. For once, an African government had looked the world's most powerful nation in the eye and answered with calm, not fear. We are not a land of deportation. The minister's words continued to circulate like a prayer of self-respect. We are a destination, a land of dignity. But beneath that pride lies a deeper question, one for the whole continent and for all of us watching. How long can a nation hold its ground when dignity comes at the cost of convenience? How long before others follow this example, not in rebellion, but in self-respect? Because this story is not just about visas. It is about identity. It is about a people who have learned that independence is not a document signed in 1960, it is a decision renewed every time you choose dignity over dependence. And perhaps that is why the words of Captain Ibrahim Traoré have begun to resonate so powerfully across the world. His revolution is not made of slogans or weapons, it is made of conviction. A conviction that Africa, in all its struggle and beauty, has the right to stand on equal ground with any power on earth. Tonight, as the headlines fade and the world moves on, Burkina Faso remains what it has always been: small in territory, vast in spirit. So the question for all of us is this: when the next small nation dares to say no, will we recognize courage when we see it? If you believe that dignity is worth more than diplomacy, share this message. Subscribe if you stand with those who defend their sovereignty not through war, but through principle. And remember, Africa's quiet revolutions often begin in silence and end by changing the world.